Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I show you how I go about planting up spring bulbs in pots. So let's go.
Guess what? We had our first snowfall today. So very exciting. Even if it didn't accumulate too much, it's always nice to have the first snowfall of the winter season. Last winter was the first time that I attempted growing spring bulbs in pots. I found the process to be very easy, and I just felt like it looked so wonderful to be able to display pots on my porch during the early April months. And not only that, I could reuse the bulbs that were in those pots, which was a bonus. During early May, the blossoms had faded, and all that was left were just the green leaves. So I decided it was a great time to go ahead and dig out all the bulbs, divide them, and then I potted them back up, but I put them in bigger pots. I wanted them to have room to keep growing. And then what happened was during the summer months, I kept watering the pots. I kept them outside where they got some sun, and I wanted them to complete their life cycle. Eventually, what happened was then the bulbs started to wither, which means that the foliage on the bulbs started to turn tan, brown, and die. And that was the perfect time for me to go ahead and dig out all of the bulbs from all of the pots and get them ready for storage. The bulbs were stored in cardboard boxes, and I made sure that I added just a little bit of peat moss into each of the boxes. But other than that, they just stayed in the basement as is, and to be honest with you, I did not check on them all summer long, and they survived just fine. And that brings us to, well, today. Did you know that spring bulbs need a certain period of cold weather, also known as vernalization? Well, they do, and here where I live in New Hampshire Zone 5B, we automatically get it, whether the bulbs are planted out in the ground or even if the bulbs are planted in pots, as long as the bulbs in pots are planted in a place where they can get that cold treatment. In warmer climates, you need to plant the bulbs in a refrigerator or somewhere where you can basically force the cold period for the bulbs. What you're looking at here are all the bulbs that I stored during the summer months in my basement. All of these bulbs, if you can believe it, were collected from pots that were planted during last winter. They are primarily tulips as well as daffodils. And I have one set of tulips that were gifted to me that are brand new. I have some tulips that were given to me by my sister-in-law and some that I dug from my mother-in-law's garden. And then I have some daffodils that were gifted to me by my sister-in-law, and they're a beautiful color blends daffodils. And there are also some tete-a-tete daffodils, which are very sweet, very cute. And I had those last year as well in my pots, and they just made such a cute little statement. So we will be working on planting some of these bulbs together. However, we will not do all of them because it would be a very repetitive process. But I definitely want to show you my process for planting some of these bulbs. So let's get at it. We're going to start with planting the tete-a-tete daffodils, and here's the container I've chosen to plant the daffodils in. It is a shallow container, which is perfectly fine because these daffodils are very, very small in size. And what I like about this container is it's lightweight. The key is you need to make sure that you have holes in the bottom of any pot or container that you choose because it needs to have good drainage for when you're watering your bulbs. You need to be able to let the water drain out from the bottom. And I'm using regular lightweight potting mix. It is used potting mix that I had in my window boxes, my hanging baskets, and my containers. And it is totally fine to use that. The nutrients that we need for our bulbs is actually contained within the bulbs themselves. They have a lot of energy stored inside of them. So I am just going to put enough potting mix in the bottom of this bowl. The important thing is you want to plant your bulbs about 2 to 3 times as deep as the height of the bulb. And so that's what I'm looking for here. This potting mix is already a little wet, which is nice. You don't have to have pre-moistened potting mix, but it is helpful that it is a little wet to start with. And I'm just trying to level it out, and if I find some roots or leaves, I'm just removing them as I go. There are some clumps in there. I'm just removing the clumps. I'm just trying to make it the best possible situation for these little bulbs. And when it comes to placing the bulbs, you want to make sure you're placing them in the right direction. And the right direction is basically the pointy way should be up. And in this case, many of the bulbs are already starting to sprout. And that tells me that's the right direction to put the bulbs in. And also, if you're not sure which direction to place your bulbs, you can always place them on their side. The bulbs are pretty amazing. If you plant them on their side, they will grow in the right direction. The key is you do not want to plant them upside down. And also, I'm going to place them fairly tight to each other. I want the bulbs to have a nice show, a nice impact. You can get away with that when you're planting bulbs in containers. When you're out in the landscape, it is important to follow the rules and space them out just to give them enough space out in the landscape. However, when you're planting in pots, you want the pots to be full. You want them to have a very nice impact when they're blooming. So it's actually better to plant the bulbs closer to each other in a pot. Now it's time to give the bulbs a very small drink of water. Next, we're going to plant the Beauty of Darwin hybrid tulips. And I like to use a ruler because I want to know how deep to plant the tulips. And the directions do say to plant the top of the bulbs 5 inches below the soil line. However, I'm going to plant them a little bit deeper than that because what I learned last year was that some of my tulips were flopping over and they probably should have been planted a little deeper in the pots. So I'm going to go with that. This year I'm going to plant them a little bit deeper than what the directions call for, and it should be fine. Now remember, it's very important to place your bulbs in the right direction. You don't want them to be upside down. They can be straight up or they can be on their side. And again, I'm placing them very close to each other because I want to make a nice, big, great impact with these flowers. Time to give this pot a good drink of water as well. And before I go any further, I want to make sure I label my pots because I want to know which plants are planted in each of the pots. So I'll do a tag for the tete-a-tete daffodils, and I'll also do a tag for the Beauty of Daffodil Tulips. Next, we're going to plant the Color Blends Top 40 daffodils. They put on such a spectacular show last year. I'm using a ruler just to kind of get an idea of how deep I want to plant these daffodils. And I do want them to be on the deeper side, again, so that they have a good support for their stems when they're growing. And I want to make sure I'm placing them the correct way. That's always important. And again, if you're not quite sure, you can place them on their side. However, I can see that quite a few of them are starting to sprout. And because I ended up with so many of these daffodils, and many of the daffodils created little daffodil babies, I'm going to be sure to pick the biggest bulbs for this pot. Now, the pot is not the fanciest looking pot in the world. However, I want to use pots that I already have, and I feel like the flowers should be what you're enjoying. Yes, it would be nice to plant them in beautiful pots, but I really don't want to go out and buy extra pots. So I'm just going to plant what I have. So let's get going and start planting these daffodils. And once again, I'm going to plant them pretty close to each other. And because of the number of daffodils that I have, I plan on planting up 2 of these big pots with these daffodils. I know I will have lots of small baby daffodils or bulblets left over in the end. I will absolutely be planting those up in their own pots, but their main goal will be to just grow foliage for next year. And you can see right here, I plan on just taking off the baby bulb from the mother bulb and planting the mother bulb in this pot. Baby bulb will get planted in a different pot. They will eventually become bigger, they will eventually bloom. It's just it won't happen next year, and that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just plant the rest of these daffodil bulbs now. So I want to share some very important tips when it comes to storing your spring bulbs in a shed or a garage. You want to check on your bulbs regularly. If they appear to be very dry, then go ahead and water them. You don't want them to be too wet though, that will rot the bulbs. Bulbs should not be allowed to freeze. That's one big reason why I keep my bulbs in the garage where I know they're not going to freeze. If you do choose to keep your potted bulbs outdoors, you just want to make sure that they don't get too wet because they will rot, and you also want to make sure that they don't freeze. When you think about it, the containers that are outside or the pots have a better chance of freezing, especially in temperatures where it gets to be -10 or -15 degrees Fahrenheit. So just keep that in mind. Because I'm keeping my pots in the garage, I have them towards the front side of my garage. I will have my car in the garage, but a big thing to know is that an idling car's exhaust fumes contains ethylene gas. That will kill the flowers inside the bulbs. You'll end up with beautiful green foliage, but you won't have any flowers. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure that the bulbs are placed in a place in your garage where they're not exposed to the car's ethylene gas. Finally, you want to bring your potted spring bulbs outside when you start seeing the green shoots that start appearing. That tells you that the plants are ready to be placed outside and to start getting some sunlight and start growing.
Well, that was a fun project, and I'm very happy that I was able to share that with you. I would love to hear from you. What is your experience? Have you ever planted spring bulbs in pots? Did it work for you? Did it not work for you? Why? What zone do you live in? I'd love for you to be able to drop a comment below and share not only that experience with me, but also with other people that are watching this video. Did you know you can even take your pots and heel them into the ground, which means taking the entire pot and putting it down at soil level so just the top is exposed? That's another way you can have spring bulbs in pots outdoors in a cold climate like the one I live in. I can't wait until next spring when I can show you how beautiful all these spring bulbs will look. And even though it's getting cold out, there are still plenty of gardening type projects that you can be doing, which is a big reason why I love making these videos, is to share with you what I'm doing, and hopefully that inspires you. Until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.